Two of the galaxy's most brilliant xenosociologists walked into a New York subway station. They came out 2 hours later as broken beings who would never speak of their experience again. This is their story. Dr. Vorthak Nimblewhiskers had 17 doctorate degrees from the University of Galactic Excellence, 3 published papers on primitive civilization behavioral patterns, and absolutely no clue what he was about to witness. His research partner, Professor Quiddle Scrumptious, boasted an IQ of 412, cybernetic implants that could calculate the trajectory of 17 different asteroid belts simultaneously, and the observational skills of a particularly gifted cosmic owl. Together, they represented the absolute pinnacle of scientific achievement in the Andromeda Spiral's academic community. "This should be fascinating," Quiddle announced, adjusting his human disguise for the 7th time. The disguise consisted of what their research files had labeled as typical Earth male attire, which apparently meant wearing a t-shirt that read "I heart pizza" and jeans that were 3 sizes too large. His artificial human ears kept sliding off his actual ears, which were roughly the size and shape of dinner plates. Vorthak's disguise was even more questionable. He'd chosen to impersonate what he believed was a human female of reproductive age, complete with a wig that looked like it had been styled by a particularly vindictive hurricane, and shoes that defied several laws of physics. "According to our cultural databases," he said, wobbling dangerously on his high heels, "the New York subway system represents the perfect microcosm of human social interaction." They had spent 6 months preparing for this mission. 6 months! Their spaceship, the Intellectual Superiority, hovered in Earth's upper atmosphere while they descended to conduct what they called Operation Public Transport Analysis. Their goal was simple: observe human behavior in a confined space for exactly 2 hours, document their findings, and return to write the definitive paper on primitive mammalian social structures. The Galactic Council had specifically chosen them for this mission because of their previous work studying the tentacled philosophers of Rigel 7, a species known for their complex social hierarchies and ability to solve mathematical equations while hanging upside down from crystal formations. If they could understand beings who communicated through interpretive tentacle dancing, surely they could figure out a few hairless primates crammed into a metal tube. "Remember," Quiddle whispered, as they approached the turnstiles, "we're looking for patterns, social hierarchies, mating rituals, territorial behaviors. This is going to be easy." The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when they tried to pay for their tickets. Their universal translators, devices capable of interpreting over 14,000 different languages, including the clicking sounds made by the silicon-based philosophers of Xerion Prime, encountered something they had never seen before: a MetroCard machine that was simultaneously broken, functioning, and apparently possessed by some form of malevolent spirit. "What the hell?" Vorthak shrieked, as the machine ate his carefully replicated human currency for the 5th time. The sound emerged from his vocal translator as a series of clicks and whistles that made nearby pigeons explode into flight. "It took our money but gave us nothing." A human teenager, wearing what appeared to be 17 different colors simultaneously, and smelling like a combination of rebellion and energy drinks, looked at them with the kind of patience usually reserved for dealing with confused grandparents. You gotta swipe it the other way and, maybe kick it a little. Sometimes it works better if you curse at it in Spanish." Quiddle's cybernetic implants began calculating the probability of this advice being scientifically sound. After 14 nanoseconds of intense computation, his brain nearly overheated. "But that's completely illogical." The teenager shrugged with the casual indifference of someone who had long ago given up trying to understand the universe. "Welcome to the MTA, dude." Finally, through a combination of luck, mild violence, and what could only be described as interpretive dance, they managed to acquire their subway passes. The teenager watched their entire performance with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly slow-motion car accident. "First time?" the teenager asked. "First time what?" Vorthak demanded, his wig sliding further askew. "Being human." The doors to the subway car opened with a sound like the universe itself was having digestive problems. What emerged was a cloud of competing scents: coffee, perfume, exhaust, mysterious meat products, and something that might have been either cleaning supplies or the tears of broken dreams. "Excellent," Quiddle whispered to his colleague. "Now we can begin our scientific observation." They had prepared for this moment with the thoroughness of beings who had never encountered anything they couldn't categorize, analyze, and reduce to a series of mathematical equations. Their briefing materials had described the subway as a transportation system utilizing underground tunnels to move citizens efficiently through urban environments. Efficient. That was the word their research had used. Efficient. The first human they encountered was a woman in a business suit who was having what appeared to be a heated argument with someone who wasn't there. She gestured wildly at the empty air, her voice rising and falling in patterns that seemed to follow some sort of emotional algorithm that their translators couldn't decode. "Fascinating," Quiddle whispered, frantically taking notes on his digital tablet. "She's engaged in a territorial dispute with an invisible opponent. This must be some form of advanced psychological warfare." "No, you absolute moron," the woman suddenly shouted, causing both aliens to jump. "I said I needed the Johnson report by Friday, not next Tuesday. Do you even listen to me?" Vorthak's pointed ears perked up. "She's clearly establishing dominance through vocal intimidation. But who is Johnson? Where is this mysterious opponent?" The woman suddenly pointed a small rectangular device at them. "You two look like you've never seen a Bluetooth headset before. Are you tourists or something?" "We're anthropologists," Quiddle said carefully, the word emerging from his translator as something that sounded like antelope-ologists. "Studying subway behavior?" the woman asked, her eyebrows rising with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for people claiming to have been abducted by aliens. "Yes, exactly!" Vorthak exclaimed, his enthusiasm causing his wig to slide completely over his eyes. "We're very interested in humaning, the way humans do human things." The woman stared at them for a long moment, then slowly backed away toward the other end of the car. "Okay, well, good luck with that. Try not to get stabbed." "Stabbed?" both aliens exclaimed simultaneously, but the woman was already gone, swallowed by the crowd of humans who seemed to move according to some form of collective unconscious that defied all known laws of physics and personal space. The subway car began to move, and with it, Vorthak and Quiddle's understanding of reality began to crumble like a poorly constructed sandcastle in a hurricane of pure chaos. The first thing they noticed was the noise. Not just the mechanical sounds of the train itself, but a symphony of human-generated audio that seemed designed to test the limits of sanity. Someone was playing music from a device that apparently had only 2 volume settings, barely audible, and Wake the Dead. Another passenger was having a phone conversation that seemed to involve describing, in graphic detail, a medical procedure that sounded like it required either advanced surgical techniques or possibly black magic. "This is incredible!" Quiddle shouted over the din, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "They're all communicating simultaneously. It's like a hive mind, but completely insane." A man in a rumpled coat suddenly appeared beside them, smelling like he had been marinated in a combination of disappointment and cheap cologne. "You boys look lost," he said, his voice carrying the kind of wisdom that comes from having given up on everything except the hope of making it through another day. "First time on the subway?" "We're researchers," Vorthak explained, trying to adjust his wig without drawing attention to the fact that it was now completely backward. "We're studying human social behavior in confined spaces." The man laughed, a sound that seemed to contain the accumulated sadness of several lifetimes. Human social behavior? On the subway? Oh, you boys are in for a treat. What do you mean? Quiddle asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his growing sense of unease. Son, the man said, settling into his seat with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of subway survival. The subway ain't about social behavior. It's about survival. It's about keeping your sanity while surrounded by people who lost theirs years ago. It's about finding meaning in a world that seems designed to crush your soul one delayed train at a time. He paused, looking out the window at the darkness rushing past. You want to study human behavior? Look around you. Really look. These people aren't just commuting. They're engaged in a daily battle against despair, and most of them don't even know it. Vorthak's cybernetic implants began processing this information, cross-referencing it with everything they knew about human psychology. The results were disturbing. But our research indicates that humans are social creatures who thrive on community interaction. Community? The man chuckled. Boy, look at this car. How many people are making eye contact? How many are talking to strangers? How many are pretending that the person sitting 6 inches away from them doesn't exist? The aliens looked around, and for the first time, they began to see what the man was talking about. Every human in the car was engaged in some form of elaborate isolation ritual. They stared at small rectangular devices, wore headphones that created personal audio bubbles, or simply gazed into the middle distance with the 1,000-yard stare of people who had seen too much. This is actually quite profound, Quiddle whispered. They're together but alone, connected but isolated. It's like they've created a social structure based on mutual avoidance. Now you're getting it, the man said. Welcome to the human condition, boys. Population, everyone, but nobody's talking about it. The man introduced himself as Cornelius Bumblebottom, a retired philosophy professor who had been riding the subway for 43 years. I started taking the train to get to work, he explained, but somewhere along the way I realized that the subway itself was the work. It's the greatest laboratory for human nature ever created. Laboratory? Vorthak asked, intrigued despite himself. Oh, yes. Cornelius's eyes lit up with the fervor of a man who had found his calling in the most unlikely place. You see, up there, he gestured toward the ceiling, people wear masks. They pretend to be civilized, polite, organized. But down here, the masks slip. Down here, you see what humans really are when they think nobody's watching. A woman with paint-stained fingers and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe suddenly appeared in their field of vision. She was carrying what appeared to be a guitar case, covered in stickers from places that probably didn't exist on any official map. Mind if I sit? She asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside them. I'm Persephone Quizzlebottom, and I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about human nature. Of course, Vorthak said, grateful for another research opportunity. Persephone sat down and immediately began tuning her guitar, producing sounds that seemed to exist in a space between music and mathematics. You guys look like you're thinking too hard about something. We're trying to understand, Quiddle began, then stopped. How could he explain that they were aliens trying to comprehend human nature? Life, Persephone suggested. Yeah, that's a tough one. I've been working on it for about 30 years now, and I'm still not sure I've got it figured out. She strummed a chord that seemed to contain the entire emotional spectrum of human experience. You know what I've learned, though? The subway is like life in fast forward. Everyone's going somewhere, but nobody knows where they're really supposed to be. Everyone's in a hurry, but nobody knows what they're rushing toward. Vorthak's translator struggled with the concept. That's deeply philosophical. Philosophy's easy, Persephone said, playing a melody that made both aliens feel inexplicably homesick for planets they'd never seen. It's living that's hard. Take this morning, for example. I woke up, looked in the mirror, and thought, today I'm going to change the world. Then I got on the subway and realized the world was already changing me. She played another chord, this one sadder and more beautiful than the first. But here's the thing about the subway, it's honest. No pretense, no fake smiles, no corporate bullshit, just people being people in all their messy, complicated, beautiful, terrible glory. A man in a business suit suddenly stood up and began what could only be described as an interpretive dance routine, complete with elaborate hand gestures and what appeared to be beatboxing. The other passengers barely glanced at him. "What is happening?" Quiddle shouted. "Oh, that's just Gerald Pumpernickel," Persephone said casually, not missing a beat in her playing. "He does this every Tuesday at precisely 11:47 a.m. Performance art or mental breakdown depends on your perspective. Gerald's been practicing corporate law for 23 years, and this is how he maintains his sanity." Gerald finished his routine, took a bow to absolutely no one, straightened his tie, and sat back down to resume reading his copy of the Wall Street Journal as if nothing had happened. "This is impossible," Vorthak exclaimed, his scientific training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. "Human behavior is supposed to follow logical patterns. There should be social norms, behavioral expectations." "There are," Persephone said, smiling with the kind of gentle madness that comes from understanding cosmic truths. "Gerald's following the most important subway rule of all. Mind your own business. He's expressing himself, nobody's bothering him, and life goes on. It's actually quite beautiful if you think about it." Cornelius nodded sagely. "The subway has its own ecosystem, its own rules, its own peculiar form of civilization. It's like a parallel universe that exists right underneath the so-called real world." The train suddenly lurched to a stop, and a voice emerged from the ancient speaker system, distorted beyond recognition, but somehow still conveying the universal message of public transportation. "Something is wrong. We don't know what, and you'll just have to deal with it. Attention, passengers!" The voice crackled, with the authority of someone who had long ago given up trying to make sense of anything. "We are being held momentarily by train traffic ahead of us. We apologize for any inconvenience, but let's be honest, you knew this was going to happen when you decided to take public transportation in New York City." 20 minutes later, they hadn't moved an inch. "This is where it gets interesting," Persephone said, putting her guitar away. "You want to study human behavior? Watch what happens when people are trapped together with no escape and no timeline." The first stage was denial. Passengers checked their phones, looked at their watches, and muttered under their breath about being late for important appointments. The aliens watched in fascination as humans engaged in what appeared to be ritualistic time-checking behaviors, as if the repeated action of looking at a clock could somehow alter the fabric of reality. "Note the obsessive temporal fixation," Cornelius observed, pulling out a worn notebook. "Humans have convinced themselves that time is linear and controllable, when in fact the subway operates on its own temporal dimension, where minutes can stretch into hours and hours can compress into seconds." The second stage was anger. Voices began to rise, conversations turned to complaints, and someone near the back of the car started what sounded like a very personal argument with the subway system itself. "You've got to be kidding me!" A man in an expensive suit shouted at the ceiling. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes that could determine the future of my entire career." "Well, maybe you should have left earlier," suggested a woman with the kind of practical wisdom that comes from years of subway experience. "Earlier," the man exploded. "I left 2 hours earlier. This is supposed to be a 15-minute ride. I've been planning this meeting for 6 months." "First time?" the woman asked, echoing the teenager from earlier, but with a knowing smile that suggested she had witnessed this exact scenario thousands of times before. The businessman stared at her in disbelief. "First time? First time? I've been taking this train every day for 8 years. "Then you should know better," she replied with the kind of devastating logic that only comes from complete acceptance of chaos. The third stage was bargaining. Passengers began making deals with invisible forces, promising to be better people if only the train would start moving. Some prayed to deities they weren't sure they believed in. Others attempted to negotiate with the universe through increasingly elaborate superstitious behaviors. "Fascinating," Quiddle whispered to his colleague, frantically taking notes. "They're attempting to influence reality through ritualistic behavior and appeals to supernatural forces." The fourth stage was depression. A collective sigh seemed to settle over the car like a blanket of resigned despair. People slumped in their seats, stared at nothing, and began to question the life choices that had led them to this moment. "This is actually quite remarkable," Quiddle whispered to his colleague, frantically taking notes. "They're experiencing a collective psychological journey through the stages of grief, but for a minor inconvenience." "It's not minor if you've been doing it every day for 20 years, Persephone said, somehow hearing his whisper despite the growing chaos around them. "The subway isn't just transportation. It's a daily reminder that you're not in control of your own life. That's either terrifying or liberating, depending on your perspective." A man near the front of the car suddenly stood up and began addressing the other passengers like he was giving a motivational speech. "Listen up, everyone. I know we're all frustrated, but we're in this together. We're all human beings trying to get through another day, and maybe, just maybe, we can help each other out." The response was immediate and unanimous. Complete silence followed by the sound of dozens of people pretending even harder that they were alone. "Well," the man said, sitting back down with the deflated air of someone whose good intentions had been thoroughly crushed by reality, "that went well." "The rejection of community leadership in times of crisis," Vorthak muttered, his scientific mind trying to process what he was witnessing. "It's like they want to suffer individually rather than solve problems collectively." "Maybe," Persephone said, "or maybe they've learned that the person who stands up and tries to take charge is usually the person you least want to follow. Underground democracy is more complex than surface democracy." Cornelius chuckled. "The subway has taught me that humans are simultaneously the most social and the most antisocial creatures in the universe. They desperately want connection, but they're terrified of actually connecting." The fifth stage was acceptance, but not the peaceful kind. This was the acceptance of people who had stared into the abyss of modern urban transportation and realized that the abyss was staring back, and it was running 45 minutes behind schedule. A teenager near the back suddenly called out, "Hey, guitar lady, play something." "Yeah!" someone else shouted. "Music makes everything better." Persephone looked around the car, seeing faces that had shifted from annoyance to something approaching hope. She pulled out her guitar and began playing something that sounded like it was made of equal parts sunshine and sadness. "This is a song," she announced, "for everyone who's ever been stuck somewhere they didn't want to be, with people they didn't choose, going somewhere they're not sure they want to go." The melody filled the subway car, and something magical happened. Not magical in the sense of actual magic, but magical in the way that music can transform a group of strangers into something approaching a community, even if just for a few minutes. People began humming along, some tapping their feet, others just listening with expressions that suggested they were remembering what it felt like to be human instead of just commuters. The businessman, who had been shouting about his meeting, found himself swaying slightly to the rhythm. The woman who had been arguing with her invisible opponent via Bluetooth began smiling. "Fascinating," Quiddle whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "They're synchronizing. It's like they're becoming a single organism." "Music as a catalyst for social bonding," Vorthak observed, his scientific training kicking in. "But why does it work when direct communication fails?" "Because," Persephone said, her fingers dancing over the strings, "music doesn't require you to be vulnerable with words. It lets you feel connected without having to explain yourself. It's the closest thing humans have to telepathy." An elderly woman near the middle of the car began singing along in a voice that had clearly seen decades of use, but still carried remarkable beauty. A construction worker with hands like sledgehammers started keeping time by tapping his hard hat against the metal pole. Even Gerald Pumpernickel, the interpretive dancing lawyer, began moving his briefcase in rhythm with the music. "You see," Cornelius said, his eyes twinkling with delight, "this is why I ride the subway. Moments like this, when the masks come off and people remember that they're all in this together." But the train suddenly lurched back to life, and the spell was broken. People returned to their phones, their books, their careful avoidance of eye contact. But something had changed. The atmosphere in the car was different, softer somehow, as if everyone had been reminded that they were part of something larger than their individual frustrations. And just like that, Persephone said, putting her guitar away, we returned to our regularly scheduled isolation. But for a moment there, we were all in this together. The next stop was announced, and half the car began the elaborate dance of preparing to exit, while the other half performed the equally complex ritual of making room while simultaneously defending their seats. Cornelius gathered his belongings and stood up. "This is my stop," he said, adjusting his rumpled coat. "But before I go, let me give you some advice about understanding human nature. Don't try to understand it. Just experience it. Let it wash over you like a tide of beautiful chaos. The moment you think you've figured us out, we'll do something completely unexpected just to keep things interesting." He paused at the door as it opened. "And remember, the subway never ends. Even when you get off, it keeps going, carrying its cargo of dreams and disappointments through the underground arteries of the city. We're all just temporary passengers on an infinite journey." With that philosophical bombshell, Cornelius disappeared into the crowd on the platform, leaving the aliens to contemplate the profound implications of his words. "This is our stop," Vorthak announced, checking his research notes. "We've observed human behavior for exactly 47 minutes. We should have enough data to—" "Wait," Quiddle said, his voice strange. "I don't think we should leave yet." "But our research protocol clearly states—" "Forget the protocol," Quiddle exclaimed, his cybernetic implants sparking with what could only be described as excitement. "Don't you see? We're not just observing human behavior anymore. We're experiencing it." The doors closed, and they were carried deeper into the subway system, deeper into the heart of human civilization, deeper into something that their 17 doctorate degrees had never prepared them for. The next car they entered was completely different. This one was filled with what appeared to be a traveling circus, if circuses consisted entirely of people who had given up on conventional reality and decided to create their own. A man in a three-piece suit was juggling office supplies while explaining quantum physics to a woman who was knitting what looked like a map of the solar system. His name tag read, "Hello, my name is Harold Mumblebottom, certified public accountant and part-time physicist." A group of teenagers were engaged in what appeared to be an elaborate rap battle about the mathematical properties of pizza, their verses incorporating complex equations about cheese distribution and crust circumference calculations. An elderly woman wearing a tiara made of subway tokens was teaching origami to a businessman who seemed to be on the verge of either enlightenment or a complete nervous breakdown. "This is impossible," Vorthak shouted, his scientific worldview crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "These behaviors don't correlate with any known patterns of social interaction." "Maybe," Quiddle said, his voice filled with a wonder that his cybernetic implants couldn't quite process. "That's the point. Maybe humans don't follow patterns. Maybe they create them, and then immediately break them just to see what happens." A woman approached them, wearing what appeared to be a business suit made entirely of newspaper clippings and held together with what looked like pure determination and possibly duct tape. "You two look confused," she said, with the kind of smile that suggested she had found the secret to happiness, and it was much weirder than anyone expected. "We're researchers," Vorthak explained, his explanation sounding more ridiculous each time he said it. "We're studying human social behavior." "Oh, wonderful," the woman exclaimed, clapping her hands together with such enthusiasm that several newspaper clippings fluttered to the floor. "You've come to the right place. The subway is where humanity comes to practice being human. I'm Brunhilde Wigglebottom, Senior Vice President of Existential Marketing at Cosmic Chaos Incorporated." "Practice?" Quiddle asked, his translator struggling with the concept. "Of course. You don't think we're naturally this strange, do you? It takes years of practice to achieve this level of beautiful chaos. Watch." She gestured toward Harold, who was now explaining string theory while keeping 17 different office supplies aloft, including what appeared to be a rubber chicken, a stapler, and a small potted plant. "Harold there has been perfecting his routine for 6 years. He started with just paper clips and basic relativity, but now he's moved on to advanced quantum mechanics and office equipment that defies the laws of physics." "But why?" Vortak demanded, his scientific mind unable to process the complete absence of logical motivation. "Because," Brunhilde said, her newspaper suit rustling with the sound of 1,000 forgotten headlines and possibly the whispered secrets of the stock market, "life is too short to be normal. Harold used to be a regular businessman. Suit, tie, boring job, boring life, existential dread on weekends. Then one day he realized that nobody was stopping him from being interesting. So he became interesting." She pointed to the teenagers who were now breakdancing while reciting poetry about the emotional lives of kitchen appliances. "And those kids? They're not just having fun. They're creating art, building community, expressing themselves in ways that don't fit into any category your research probably accounts for. That's Fitzgerald Snodgrass and his crew. They've been working on an epic poem about the secret thoughts of subway tokens for 3 months now." This is actually quite profound," Quiddle whispered, his cybernetic implants beginning to overheat as they tried to process the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. "They're not just surviving in this environment, they're thriving. They're turning a mundane experience into something beautiful," Brunhilde suggested. "Weird, inexplicable, completely bonkers. Yeah, that's humanity for you. We specialize in taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary, usually in ways that make absolutely no sense to anyone else, including ourselves." The train pulled into the next station, and a new wave of passengers entered, each more unlikely than the last. There was a man carrying what appeared to be a small tree that he was having an intense philosophical discussion with, a woman in a wedding dress eating a sandwich while reading what looked like a manual on quantum mechanics, and someone in a full medieval knight costume who was having an animated debate with a person dressed as a giant hot dog about the philosophical implications of public transportation and whether mustard could be considered a viable form of social commentary. "This is getting out of hand," Vortak muttered, his scientific training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. "Human behavior is supposed to follow logical patterns. There should be social norms, cultural expectations, some semblance of order." "There are," Brunhilde said, smiling with the kind of gentle madness that comes from understanding cosmic truths that most people are too sane to comprehend. "The norm is that there are no norms. The expectation is that everyone will exceed expectations in ways that nobody could have expected. The order is that chaos is the only constant." The medieval knight, whose name tag identified him as Sir Reginald Fluffernutter, Knight of the Round Table of late-night philosophy, suddenly approached them. "Excuse me, good sir and madam," he said with impeccable medieval courtesy, "but I couldn't help but notice that you appear to be documenting our little community here. Might I inquire as to the nature of your quest?" We're studying human social behavior," Vortak stammered, completely unprepared for a polite conversation with someone dressed as a medieval knight in a subway car. "Ah!" Sir Reginald exclaimed, his eyes lighting up behind his visor. "A noble pursuit indeed. And what have you discovered about our peculiar species thus far?" "That you're all completely insane," Quiddle blurted out, his cybernetic implants sparking with frustration. Sir Reginald considered this for a moment, then nodded sagely. Yes, that's a fair assessment. But here's the thing about insanity. It's only insane if you're trying to be sane. We've simply chosen to embrace the absurdity of existence rather than pretend it makes sense. The giant hot dog, who introduced himself as Morton Beefdoggle, freelance philosopher and part-time condiment, chimed in. You see, the subway is a microcosm of the human condition. We're all trapped in this metal tube, hurtling through darkness toward destinations we're not entirely sure we want to reach, surrounded by strangers who are somehow exactly like us in their desperate attempt to find meaning in the meaningless. But that's... Vorthak's translator gave up trying to process this level of philosophical complexity delivered by someone dressed as a processed meat product. Terrifying? Liberating? Completely ridiculous? Morton continued. Yes, it's all of those things. That's what makes it beautiful. Humans are the only species in the universe that can simultaneously acknowledge the absurdity of existence and decide to make it even more absurd just for the fun of it. A man in a business suit suddenly stood up and began performing what appeared to be interpretive dance. But instead of ignoring him like the previous passengers had done, this group began providing musical accompaniment. Someone started beatboxing. Another person began clapping a rhythm that seemed to follow mathematical principles that shouldn't exist, and the teenagers from earlier joined in with what sounded like a rap song about the spiritual journey of the morning commute and the metaphysical implications of delayed trains. This is a flash mob, Quiddle exclaimed, his excitement overriding his confusion. They're creating spontaneous community art. Not exactly, Brunhilde said, swaying to the rhythm in a way that made her newspaper suit rustle like autumn leaves in a philosophical windstorm. This is just Tuesday on the number 6 train. Harold's physics juggling, Sir Reginald and Morton's philosophical debates, Marcus Wigglesworth's interpretive dance of corporate despair. This happens every week. Same time, same place, same beautiful chaos. Oh, but that's impossible! Vorthak shouted over the music, which had now evolved to include what sounded like a full orchestra, despite the fact that there were only about 20 people in the car. You can't maintain consistent social behaviors based on complete randomness. Who says it's random? Brunhilde asked, her newspaper suit rustling with the sound of cosmic truth being folded into neat, incomprehensible packages. Maybe this is the most logical response to an illogical world. Maybe chaos is the only sane response to insanity. Maybe we've figured out something that your advanced civilization hasn't, that the universe doesn't make sense, so why should we? The performance reached a crescendo, with Marcus's interpretive dance becoming increasingly elaborate as he expressed what appeared to be the entire emotional spectrum of modern office life through movement, while Sir Reginald and Morton's philosophical discussion grew more passionate as they debated whether existence was a cosmic joke or a cosmic tragedy, and the teenagers' rap evolved into something that sounded like it contained the mathematical secrets of the universe, expressed through rhyming couplets about pizza and subway tokens. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Everyone returned to their seats, the music stopped, and the car fell into a comfortable silence that somehow felt more connected than any conversation could have been. And that, Brunhilde said, settling back into her seat with a rustle of newsprint that sounded like the whispered wisdom of 1,000 editorials, is how humans create meaning in a meaningless world. We make our own entertainment, our own community, our own reasons to keep going, and we do it all while pretending that this is perfectly normal behavior for mammals who supposedly evolved from tree-dwelling primates. But why? Quiddle asked, his voice small with wonder that threatened to overwhelm his cybernetic processing systems. Why go through all this effort for something that will be forgotten in 5 minutes? Because, Brunhilde said, her eyes twinkling with the kind of wisdom that comes from having seen too much and deciding to find it beautiful anyway. Those 5 minutes are what make the rest of the day worth living. We're not performing for posterity. We're performing for right now, for each other. for the simple joy of being alive in this moment and sharing it with fellow travelers on the cosmic subway train of existence. Sir Reginald nodded in agreement. The quest for meaning is not about finding the answer, it's about enjoying the question. And down here, in these tunnels beneath the city, we've learned to turn the questions into art. Morton, the philosophical hot dog, added, "Plus, if you're going to spend your life in transit, you might as well make the journey interesting." Nobody ever lay on their deathbed wishing they had been more boring. The train began to slow for the next station, and Vorthak realized that they had been underground for over an hour and a half. Their research mission was supposed to last exactly 2 hours, but somehow time had become irrelevant. They were no longer observing human behavior. They were living it, breathing it, becoming part of the beautiful madness that seemed to define human existence. "I think," Vorthak said quietly, his voice barely audible over the gentle rumble of the train, "we need to get off at the next stop." "Why?" Quiddle asked, though he already knew the answer with the kind of certainty that only comes from having experienced something that fundamentally changes your understanding of reality. "Because if we don't leave now, we might never leave, and I'm not sure we'd want to," Vorthak replied, his scientific training warring with a growing desire to abandon everything he had ever known about logic and reason and simply surrender to the chaos. Brunhilde overheard them and smiled with the kind of gentle understanding that suggested she had witnessed this exact moment of existential crisis countless times before. That's the thing about the subway. It's not just a place you go. It's a place you become. Everyone who rides it long enough gets changed by it. You came down here as researchers, but you're leaving as something else entirely. What are we leaving as? Vorthak asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Humans, Brunhilde said simply, her newspaper suit rustling with the sound of universal truth being delivered through recycled journalism. Or at least you understand what it means to be human now. The chaos, the beauty, the inexplicable connections, the way we create meaning out of nothing and find joy in the most unlikely places. Sir Reginald removed his helmet, revealing a perfectly ordinary face that somehow looked extraordinary in the context of his medieval costume. The greatest quest is not to find yourself, but to lose yourself so completely that you discover something entirely new. You came here looking for patterns, but you found something far more valuable. The pattern beneath the patterns, the order within the chaos. Morton, the philosophical hot dog, nodded sagely, which was somehow both ridiculous and profound. You've learned the most important lesson of all, that understanding humans isn't about figuring us out. It's about accepting that we can't be figured out, and that's what makes us beautiful. The train pulled into the station, and the doors opened with their familiar mechanical sigh that now sounded to the aliens like a cosmic exhale, the universe itself breathing out the tensions and contradictions of human existence. Vorthak and Quiddle stood up, their legs shaky from more than just the motion of the train. "Wait," Quiddle said, turning back to Brunhilde, his cybernetic implants sparking with something that felt suspiciously like emotion. "What's your name? Your real name?" "Does it matter?" she asked, her smile containing the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 subway rides and the gentle madness of someone who had found enlightenment in the most unlikely place. "You'll never see me again, and I'll never see you. But for this moment we shared something real. Isn't that enough?" Harold looked up from his juggling routine, office supplies still spinning in perfect arcs above his head. "Names are just labels we use to pretend we understand each other. What matters is the connection, the shared experience of being alive and bewildered in a universe that makes no sense. Besides," added one of the rap-battling teenagers, "we're all just characters in the great cosmic story of existence. Our names change, but the story goes on." They stepped off the train and watched as it disappeared into the tunnel, carrying with it the juggling physicist, the rap-battling teenagers, the interpretive dancer, the medieval knight, the philosophical hot dog, the woman in the newspaper suit, and all the other beautiful, impossible, perfectly human characters who had shown them that logic was overrated and chaos was underappreciated. Vorthak and Quiddle stood on the platform for a long time, not speaking, just trying to process what they had experienced. Their universal translators had given up trying to categorize what they had witnessed, their displays now showing nothing but question marks and error messages. Their scientific instruments had recorded nothing but anomalies, contradictions, and impossibilities. Their research notes were full of observations that made no sense when viewed through any logical framework known to their advanced civilization. "How do we write a report about this?" Quiddle asked finally, his voice hollow with the weight of understanding something that couldn't be understood. "We don't," Vorthak said, his scientific worldview now reduced to rubble, but somehow feeling more complete than it ever had before. "How do you explain to beings who communicate through pure logic that humans thrive on illogic? How do you describe the beauty of chaos to creatures who find meaning in order? How do you quantify the unquantifiable?" They made their way back to the surface, emerging from the subway system like explorers returning from an alien world that existed right beneath their feet. The sunlight felt strange on their faces, and the sounds of the city above ground seemed muted and distant compared to the vibrant chaos they had just left behind. The surface world looked the same, but they knew with absolute certainty that they were seeing it through completely different eyes. Their spaceship was waiting for them in the designated coordinates, its sleek surfaces and logical design suddenly looking cold and empty compared to the warm madness of the subway. The vessel represented everything their civilization valued: efficiency, logic, order, predictability. And for the first time in their lives, these things seemed inadequate, insufficient, almost tragic in their limitation. They climbed aboard and sat in their research chairs, staring at their blank report forms with the kind of bewildered silence that comes from having experienced something that fundamentally challenges everything you thought you knew about existence. The ship's computers hummed around them with their usual logical efficiency, but the sound now seemed mechanical and lifeless compared to the organic chaos they had just witnessed. "Status report," came the voice of their supervisor from the Galactic Council, transmitted across the vast distances of space with crystal clarity and bureaucratic impatience. "Operation Public Transport Analysis Completion Status requested immediately." Vorthak and Quiddle looked at each other, their eyes containing the shared knowledge of something that could not be explained, only experienced, only lived, only felt in the deepest recesses of whatever passed for their souls. "Mission completed," Vorthak said finally, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic irony. "Human social behavior observed and documented." "Excellent. Preliminary findings report requested." "What behavioral patterns did you identify? What social hierarchies did you observe? What mating rituals? What territorial disputes? The Council is very eager to receive your analysis." Another long pause. In the background, their ship's computers continued their relentless humming, processing data, analyzing patterns, reducing the vast complexity of existence to neat, comprehensible categories. Everything in their ordered universe made sense, followed rules, could be predicted and analyzed and filed away in appropriate databases. "Our conclusion," Quiddle said slowly, each word carefully chosen because words were all they had to bridge the gap between what they had experienced and what their civilization could understand, "is that human behavior cannot be concluded. It can only be experienced. And once experienced, it changes you in ways that cannot be undone, measured, or properly documented." "That's not very scientific," their supervisor noted, with the kind of disapproval reserved for researchers who had clearly failed to maintain proper objective distance from their subjects. "The Council expects quantifiable data, statistical analysis, behavioral predictions." "Surely you gathered some useful information during your 2-hour observation period." "We gathered the most important information possible," Vorthak replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. We learned that science has its limitations. Some things are too beautiful, too chaotic, too alive to be reduced to data points and behavioral categories. Some experiences can only be lived, not studied. I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying your mission was a failure? No, Quiddle said, and for the first time in his 412 IQ existence, he was completely comfortable with not understanding something, completely at peace with the impossibility of explaining the inexplicable. We're saying that success and failure are categories that don't apply to what we experienced. We learned something that transcends scientific methodology. We discovered something about existence itself, which is... Both aliens sat in silence for a moment, trying to find words for something that existed beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond the reach of even their advanced civilization's understanding. That the most intelligent response to an unintelligible universe, Vorthak said finally, might be to embrace the unintelligibility, that chaos and meaning aren't opposites, they're dance partners, that humans have figured out something we never even knew we were missing. And what is that? How to be alive, Quiddle whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Not just conscious, not just intelligent, not just functional. Actually, genuinely, impossibly alive. Their supervisor's silence stretched across the cosmic distances, heavy with bureaucratic confusion and administrative frustration. Finally, the voice returned, crisp with professional disappointment. I'll mark your report as inconclusive pending further review. Return to base immediately for debriefing and possible reassignment to less complex research subjects. They submitted their official report as inconclusive due to insufficient data and methodological complications, but privately, they both knew that they had collected the most important data of their lives. They had learned that some experiences cannot be quantified, some behaviors cannot be predicted, some forms of intelligence cannot be measured, and some truths cannot be explained to anyone who has not lived them personally and completely. They returned to their home planet, resumed their academic careers, and continued their research into the social behaviors of various species throughout the galaxy. But they never spoke of their time in the New York subway system. Not to their colleagues, not to their supervisors, not even to each other. It became their shared secret, their private revolution against the tyranny of logic and the oppression of understanding. Years passed, decades, centuries. Vorthak published papers on the territorial behaviors of the crystal singers of Altair Prime, winning awards for his innovative methodological approaches that somehow managed to capture the poetry beneath the science. Quiddle wrote extensively about the mating rituals of the quantum philosophers of Betelgeuse, his work praised for its unusual sensitivity to the emotional dimensions of alien psychology. They became respected experts in their field, sought after for their insights into alien psychology and social dynamics. Other researchers noticed that their work had developed a certain inexplicable quality, a depth and nuance that went beyond mere scientific observation. When asked about their techniques, they would simply smile and say that some things couldn't be taught, only experienced. But sometimes, late at night in their perfectly ordered laboratories, they would find themselves thinking about a woman in a newspaper suit who had taught them that chaos could be beautiful, about a man who juggled office supplies while explaining quantum physics, about teenagers who created art out of nothing but rhythm and words and the pure joy of being young and alive in an impossible universe. And sometimes, just sometimes, they would catch themselves humming a melody that a human woman had played on a guitar in a subway car, a song for everyone who had ever been stuck somewhere they didn't want to be, with people they didn't choose, going somewhere they weren't sure they wanted to go. The melody would remind them that they had touched something profound in that underground world, something that had changed them forever. They had witnessed the daily miracle of human existence, The way ordinary people, in ordinary circumstances, could create extraordinary moments of connection, beauty and meaning out of absolutely nothing, except their shared humanity and their refusal to accept that meaninglessness was the final word on anything. They had learned that the most important discoveries cannot be published in academic journals, that the most valuable research cannot be reduced to statistical analysis, and that the most profound truths cannot be explained to anyone who has not lived them personally and completely and with the kind of openness that makes you vulnerable to being forever changed. They had spent 2 hours in a human subway system, and they had discovered that humanity's greatest achievement was not their technology or their art or their science, but their ability to find joy in the midst of chaos, to create community among strangers, and to make the ordinary extraordinary through the simple act of being genuinely, authentically, inexplicably human in all their beautiful contradictions. The universe was vast and filled with wonders beyond imagination, cosmic phenomena that defied comprehension, civilizations that spanned galaxies and technologies that bordered on magic. But none of them had ever seen anything quite like a group of humans turning a delayed subway train into a spontaneous celebration of existence itself, a living testament to the beautiful absurdity of consciousness in an indifferent cosmos that somehow became less indifferent when filled with beings who refused to accept indifference as the final answer. And that, they realized, was something that could never be spoken of, only remembered, like a beautiful dream that becomes more precious precisely because it cannot be shared with anyone who was not there to experience it firsthand, to feel it in their bones, to have it rewire their understanding of what it meant to be conscious in a universe that didn't seem designed for consciousness. The subway had taught them the most human lesson of all. Some experiences are too profound for words, too meaningful for analysis, and too beautiful for anything except silence and the quiet amazement of having been briefly, impossibly touched by magic disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning commute through the underground arteries of human civilization. In the end, the most sophisticated beings in the galaxy had learned that the secret to understanding humanity was not to understand it at all, but simply to experience it, to be changed by it, and to carry that change forward into a universe that suddenly seemed both more mysterious and more wonderful than any amount of scientific knowledge could ever reveal. They had discovered that humans were not just another species to be catalogued and analyzed, but something far more dangerous and beautiful. They were creators of meaning in a meaningless universe, architects of joy in the face of despair, and the only beings they had ever encountered who could transform the mundane act of getting from one place to another into an art form that transcended logic, reason, and everything their advanced civilization had taught them about the nature of intelligent life. The galaxy would never know what they had learned in those 2 hours beneath the streets of New York, but the universe itself had been subtly altered by their experience, made richer by their newfound understanding that sometimes the most profound truths come not from observation and analysis, but from the simple act of being present in the moment when ordinary people do extraordinary things for no reason other than the fact that they are alive, and consciousness is beautiful, and existence itself is the greatest miracle of all. They had learned that humans were living proof that intelligence without joy was merely computation, that logic without laughter was just sophisticated machinery, and that understanding without wonder was nothing more than an elaborate form of blindness to the true nature of reality. And in their quiet moments, when the weight of their scientific achievements felt somehow insufficient, they would remember that for 2 hours in a New York subway, they had been more than researchers, more than observers, more than representatives of an advanced alien civilization. They had been briefly and impossibly human. The memory would always remain with them, a secret treasure buried deep in their consciousness, a reminder that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any equation could capture, and that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that take you not to new places, but to new ways of seeing the places you thought you already understood. In the end, they had discovered that humans were not the subjects of their research, but their teachers, and the subway was not a laboratory, but a classroom where the curriculum was chaos, and the graduation requirement was learning to dance with the unknowable.